Okay, I think we're going to get started. Hello, I just want to start again, like every panelist has, in thanking AMC, thanking Krista and Judith. This has just been a fantastic conference. Thank you. And thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about collection sharing. Our topic today is indeed collection sharing and new models of curatorial collaboration and co-creation. And each of us on the panel has been involved with collection sharing to varying degrees of time, but centrally for our organizations. I'm Pam Franks, and I work at the Yale University Art Gallery. I'm the curator of modern and contemporary art and the deputy director. And I've been the project lead for collection sharing for the institution for the last decade. So at this point, that's feeling like a relatively substantial history. Jamal Sheets is the director and curator of the Fisk University Art Museums. He is the leader of an institution that has a very long history of collection sharing projects and endeavors that have been innovative for a long time, and some fresh new projects as well. Margie Conrads is the Director of Curatorial Affairs at Crest Bridges Museum and also the brains behind Artbridges, which is absolutely a new initiative that so many of us are very intrigued to learn about. And Amber Straken is the Crest Research Associate at the Georgia Museum of Art, and also a registrar at that museum, and has been doing all of the important groundwork for a new Crest Loan Network initiative that is going to be getting underway in years to come. So we're, as I say, all at different stages of developing our respective collection sharing initiatives. And as we've been talking about this panel, it's been very clear that thinking about collection sharing is a way of thinking about new modes, new models of collaboration more generally, collaborating across institutions, thinking about the ways that we work with our collections, think about our collections differently, more expansively, in a more networked way, and sort of think about access, research, display, presentation, interpretation across museums more synthetically. So what I thought I'd do to sort of frame the conversation today is give a very, very brief summary history of collection sharing at the Yale University Art Gallery. Not so much to give you the whole picture of everything that we've done through collection sharing, because we've probably had 30 or 40 different collection sharing projects at this point, but more to raise certain key lessons that we've learned over the 10-year evolution of our collection sharing endeavor, and sort of frame themes that I think may flow through our conversation. We very much hope that this panel will be a conversation. So glad you're here for the last panel of the day. We recognize that it's late afternoon on the second day of a very stimulating conference. So we want this to be a conversation. We're going to try to keep it as lively as we can. Feel free to break in along the way, but we do want to describe all of our programs because we very much want to engage all of you as potential partners in specific projects, but more importantly as thought partners as we really formulate together new models of collaboration through collection sharing. So the Yale University Art Gallery Collection Sharing Initiative started in 2008 with the support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. The initial grant period was for 4 years, and it enabled 6 different projects with other college and university museum partners, specifically for the primary goal of enhancing curricular engagement with original works of art. What we found was that in addition to that primary goal, there was a really kind of wonderful secondary goal that bore more fruit than we ever could have imagined, and that was the kinds of professional relationships and communities that developed through these collection sharing projects. So things like joint research projects, sharing knowledge, exchanging pedagogical strategies was really critically important to this first phase of the project, and actually I would say even more important than the lending and borrowing of works of art. Those relationships have continued. The Mellon Grant went through 2012, And the relationships have continued ever since and have been an extremely rich source of thinking for how we work together. So one of the first themes that I want us to really think about is how the professional networks that develop through collection sharing are of lasting import as we think about what we do in our field moving forward. The second phase, when the Mellon Grant ended, a couple things happened. First, the collection sharing initiative was endowed by the Isabel Wilson Memorial Fund, ensuring that we could continue collection sharing in perpetuity. So that was a very big deal. We came off of this grant period with 6 very successful projects, and it was a compelling case to, that this work was worth doing and continuing to explore the possibilities of cross-institutional collaboration. So that endowment was a big deal. The other thing that was perhaps even more surprising is a number of collections started coming to the Yale University Art Gallery specifically for because the donors knew that they would be shared if they were housed at the gallery. So a prime example of that is the Arthur Ross collection of Old Master prints. The foundation that was responsible for this extraordinary collection of Old Master prints was thinking of sort of dispersing it among institutions. But when the foundation representatives learned of the collection sharing initiative, they decided that it would actually be more effective for their purpose of providing access to this collection to donate it in its entirety to the Yale University Art Gallery with the agreement that it would be shared with other educational institutions going on. And that's happened now several times. So the second theme that I hope we'll discuss as we go through all of the different collection sharing initiatives and talk about how they're working is how collection sharing has become a motivating force for collection development and for major collection donations, and also a shaping force for how we strategically grow our collections with sharing in mind. So that's sort of the second line of question that we want to pursue today. And then finally, I thought I'd bring us right up to the present with a collection sharing project that's underway. We are working now on an exhibition called Reckoning with the Incident, John Wilson's Studies for a Lynching Mural, that will be on view at the Yale University Art Gallery this fall. John Wilson was an African-American artist who died a couple years ago. He moved to Mexico in the 1950s, specifically to study mural painting. He arrived in 1952 and enrolled in a mural painting course. The subject that he chose to take on when his turn came to paint a mural in this course was this lynching scene. You see the full composition in a gouache study from the Yale Art Gallery's collection on the screen. And it was with the knowledge that the mural that he made would be painted out to make room for the project by the next student, and then the one after that. That was the practice of this course. The subject of the painting was one that Wilson talked about so movingly as a kind of traumatic history of seeing lynching photographs as a child growing up and engaging in this particular project when he left the United States and went to Mexico as a way of exercising this very sort of horrific visual data bank that he developed in his memory over the years through his parents' newspapers and so forth. And so one of the really interesting things about this work is he made many, many studies for the mural and many, many paintings and prints after the mural. So what we're doing for this collection sharing project is bringing together as many of the related works as we can, and it happens that the deepest holdings are at Yale, but also at Grinnell College in the Faulkner Art Gallery, and at Clark Atlanta University. So we're bringing together the holdings of these 3 institutions to create an exhibition, and then traveling the exhibition to each of the 3 institutions, and then also on to the David C. Driscoll Center at the University of Maryland, which is a longstanding partner of the Yale University Art Gallery on all kinds of initiatives. So it'll go to 4 venues. So the theme that I wanted to bring out through discussing this particular current project is the theme of reciprocity and the kinds of benefits and deepening of partnership that come with making sure that the collection sharing goes both ways. So borrowing as well as lending works. Obviously, this exhibition couldn't be happening if it weren't for that kind of bringing together of collections. But I think the richer potential that we found is that of engaging with our colleagues at the other institutions and also the students at all of those institutions to think about how to present this exhibition, which we want to do obviously with utmost care, and the kind of programming that will surround the exhibition. All of our campuses are deeply engaged with conversations about the racial climate and on campus and in the world, and we hope that this exhibition will be used curricularly and a sort of prompt for many productive conversations on campus. And I have to say, thinking about that with our colleagues from Grinnell and Clark Atlanta University and the University of Maryland has been a very productive sort of strategy for thinking about how to present and program for this exhibition. So the third theme that I hope we'll talk about today is this notion of reciprocity and the importance and value of being a borrower as well as a lender of work. So with that, I think I'm going to let my co-panelists talk about their particular experiences with collection sharing. And I thought we'd start with Jamal Sheets, who has, through the Fisk University Art Museums, collaborated with the Yale University Art Gallery and also with Crest Bridges quite extensively. So you seem a great place to start.
Thank you. Thank you. And also thank you for inviting me to the panel. And this has been a fantastic conference. And I've enjoyed every moment of it as it's been compounding. And so I'm happy that we're the last session of the day to really think about collection sharing and what that actually does. I'm going to go to the next slide. But Fisk University Galleries, we've been a collecting institution since the 1870s. We didn't have our first permanent gallery until 1949, and that was at the receipt of the Alfred Stieglitz Collection of Modern Art, a gift of George O'Keeffe. And I think it's important to think about the population that it serves. Fisk is a historically black college and university. It's a small school, but we have over 4,000 objects. And so I think about that as a point of activism, but also servicing a population that did not have access. And I think that's an operative word that we use a lot when we talk about collection sharing. And so I'm going to go to this next video that's playing now. In 2012, we entered an agreement with Crest Bridges, which is now a partnership, where we co-own the collection, which has given us a great opportunity. And we just finished our first rotation. It travels from Fisk to Crest Bridges every 2 years. And now we can begin to talk about the success of it and what's come out of it. And so what you're seeing is the grand opening of Origins of Influence Part 2. That was the second rendition of the exhibition. But the works on paper through this partnership and co-ownership were conserved, and now the paintings are now being conserved as well. The other thing that's come out of it is that it's given our students a great opportunity to learn and share. When the registrar from Crest Bridges came, Jennifer DiMartino, who was fantastic, worked with our students while she was at Fisk. Internships that have also come out of that. And so we're just now beginning to talk about the real impact that this partnership is starting to make. Another one which I'm really excited about is working with Yale University Galleries. I'm going to let Pam talk about this just for a second because it's such a wonderful story about this exhibition and how it came to Fisk. And this is Lee Friedlander and the Prayer Pilgrimage for Freedom. But can you talk about how it came into you all's collection before?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it is a great story, actually. Some of you may know that the Yale University Art Gallery has a very long history of, or a very deep relationship with Lee Friedlander, the wonderful photographer, and we've published something like 6 or 7 books of his work. We have well over 1,000 of his photographs in the collection at this point. And I was at his studio, and he showed me a mock-up for a book of this body of work that I'd never heard of, the Prayer Pilgrimage March of 1957, 60 unique photographs that were now, after however many years, being published in a book. And I said, Lee, this is a project we should have done. What's going on? We've been working together for so long. And he said, well, yeah, I didn't think of that. But you've been sharing collections so much, and I really want these photographs to be seen, and they are unique prints. So again, kind of in keeping with what I said about the Arthur Ross collection, Lee made a gift of these 60 unique prints to the gallery, again, with the idea that we would share them. So talk about how the sharing actually ended up happening.
And so I would say last year we started, was it last year or year before last? Last year. Ian McClure and Paul Mézières from the Center of Cultural Preservation came to Fisk amongst many other HBCUs as part of the HBCU Alliance. They came to assess our collection and looked at our archives. Funny story was that when they came, we also asked them to speak to our students. And this is one thing that I think is really important that came out of that conversation, is that Fisk, 2/3 of our students are STEM majors. As somebody in the earlier panel talked about being a first-generation college student, yes, we still have many first-generation college students who parents send their kids to school and say, you're going to be a doctor or you're going to be a lawyer. And so what happened when they did that presentation, those students looked at and learned about the field of conservation and were excited about it. And so through those conversations with other HBCUs and you guys, that we did the Summer Institute of Technical Art History at Yale, where we were invited to participate and get conservation training there. And at that moment, we saw this exhibition as part of it. It made sense for us at that time because Nashville as a whole, in April, we were having a conversation on social justice. We were celebrating the 50th anniversary of civil rights legislation and the assassination of Martin Luther King. And so when we first started having the conversation, I said, we must have this show. And so we ended up getting it. And it's also going to travel to a few other HBCUs. And to talk about the show, it's the Prayer Pilgrimage. Many people were in Washington, D.C. for this Prayer Pilgrimage to hear and to see Mahalia Jackson and Harry Belafonte. And what they heard was, for the first time, was Martin Luther King. And that's where he gave the iconic Give Us a Ballot speech. And so we felt that it was important to show it at that time. All right. I'm sure there's more, but it will come up in conversation.
So first of all, I'd just like to join in the thanks to Pam and all the panelists and all of you who have brought up good questions these last 2 days. We've all seen a number of threads kind of being pulled through, and many of them are the kinds of things that we're thinking about as we're birthing Artbridges. And Artbridges is a very new initiative. It was just announced last September, so it is very much in its gestational stages. And it's a little bit different than the other collection sharing models that we're hearing about this afternoon. It is its own standalone 501c3 operating foundation, and it has a very specific mission. Its mission is to share outstanding works of American art with those who have limited access. And just to give you a little glimpse into how it came to be, it is a foundation that has been set up by Alice Walton. It is separate from Crest Bridges. Crest Bridges is actually contracted to do the work of the foundation at this time because Artbridges has a board of directors but does not yet have its own staff. And it really has been born out of what we have learned in Northwest Arkansas by bringing great American art, which we defined extremely broadly, both as far as across the chronology, time, type, makers, etc. And when Crest Bridges, which is now just about 6.5 years old, the impact it has had in an area where there was no access or easy access to art, and particularly significant American art. And so just for those of you who don't know where Northwest Arkansas is, it's about 3 hours straight south of Kansas City and 2 hours east of Tulsa. And so really, Alice Walton, the birth of Crystal Bridges was related to the fact that having grown up in that area, she was in college before she actually really ever saw original works of art. And then kind of becoming very passionate about art has brought art to Northwest Arkansas. And so it is the idea and the impact from the Crystal Bridges experience that Artbridges is really trying to take national. But it can't be done by one entity, and so it really takes all of us in this room and those of our colleagues who are not here to help make this happen. And I think we all probably share in the idea that art can transform lives, and so we hope at Artbridges to help bring art to any community across the country. So there are 4 goals that are really embedded in the work of Artbridges, and they include stimulating collection sharing. We all know that there are many institutions, large and small, that have collections that don't get out and seen by even the publics in their own community. Sparking experimentation is another objective. Fostering new ways of collaboration among museums of all sizes. I think all of us have our own experiences where we have a group of colleagues that we often call on, that we often work with, and through the work of Artbridges, we hope that we can work more broadly across the whole spectrum of museums, and that there's also a significant engagement component to Artbridges, and it really champions museum engagement with communities to build and sustain inclusive relationships and really opening conversations that we all know are important in our communities. So the way that this is taking place is through 4 basic program areas, and I'll just be able to touch on them for a moment. So Artbridges is a collecting foundation, and the curatorial staff at Crystal Bridges, for this time being anyway, is in essence serves as the curators for the Artbridges collection. The collection is about not quite 40 objects large at the moment, but the way that the collection's being activated is that works are available for loan to institutions where access to the kinds of work in the collection have been a challenge. And those works go on loan to institutions up to a year long-term loan. And the cost of the loan, because I know everyone is always mindful of budgetary issues, is supported by Artbridges. So everything from packing, crating, and even insurance on site, because we also know that a work of significant insurance value can bump everybody's insurance policy. And so that's one program area. Secondly, and perhaps the largest potential and currently the largest program area, is supporting collection sharing exhibitions. And that happens in 3 different ways. For institutions that borrow an Artbridges object, there is the opportunity to use that work as a catalyst for an exhibition that can happen at what we consider sort of the hosting institution. And that institution may need partnership with collection-rich institutions. So part of Artbridges' job is in a way to be matchmaker and to understand what's needed and perhaps to put partners together that haven't worked together or may not know each other. And it goes both directions, both in larger and smaller institutions. So that's one type of collection sharing opportunity. Secondly, we are working with a number of, we might think of as collection-rich institutions, institutions that have works that aren't often on view, that they have already been in smart collection exhibitions, but haven't necessarily traveled. And so those exhibitions are going to be, and starting in about the next month or two, there will start to be available exhibitions that range between about 1,500 square feet to up about 4,000 square feet that are collection shows that can travel the country. And the way that the financial model works in that regard is that once the tour is established, that the host venues create a budget for that exhibition, and they receive program support. And from there, the organizing institution receives reimbursement for the work done. And then lastly, the other collection sharing model is that, and this can be from a large institution or a small institution, that there is an idea that is based around collections, and that two or more institutions can collaborate together in a collection sharing venture. Because our time is short, I'm not going into examples, but if anyone is interested, I can share them later. But that we do have a consortium of 4 small museums that are bringing their collections together, sharing them among themselves, and then there's the opportunity to also have those works go on tour. And a similar funding model as I described in the other collection sharing exhibitions. And then a third program area is that there is programming and evaluation support. We're very much interested in making sure that these projects really can have community impact. And so there is separate funding opportunity for institutions to do interpretation and programming that really helps them reach their aspirational goals. This is the kind of circumstance where the experimentation, both in the exhibitions but also in programming and interpretation, really can come into play. And so that we hope that there's a stimulus to allow institutions to do things that is low risk from the sense of these are supported by Artbridges, so that from a financial point of view, there's low risk, but that really allows institutions to take on things that they've always wanted to do, but perhaps haven't had the opportunity. And because we're interested in impact of all these projects, we work with and we have evaluation that is supported by Artbridges built into every single project. And then lastly, there is what we call Terra Art Bridges, and that's a different kind of sharing initiative. It's more, we have partnered with the Terra Foundation for American Art, which many of you all may be familiar with, and Terra has been a grant-making agency foundation particularly for international projects. But in this case, collection-rich large institutions are being invited to submit a proposal where they will partner with anywhere to 4 to 6 regional institutions, and not necessarily in their own region, but smaller institutions that have not had access to deep and wide collections, and together to co-create new projects. And I should say that in each of the models that I have mentioned, that there is an opportunity for all institutions to have different levels and layers of co-creation, from advisory to complete collaboration. And then I'll just mention, you see in the map there, it's just the list of partners is very partial. We're working with about 75 institutions in a variety of different ways right now, and we are always looking for more interested partners. So we would love to have you talk to us and to share your ideas and to see where there might be a match. And then just lastly, I thought, because it's very weird for the curatorial type to sit up here without using images, that I would just give you a taste of part of the Artbridges collection, where you can see that it is a variety of types of objects, painting, sculpture, video, and across the chronology. So love to talk to anyone after the meeting, or get in touch if you have interest.
Okay, first I would like to thank Pam for including me in on this panel. I am an emerging professional, definitely. I've been working on this Crest project for the past year and a half. As an emerging professional, it has been an honor not only to speak to you all, but also to work with the Crest collection for the past year and a half. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Samuel H. Crest. He was a businessman and philanthropist who amassed one of the most significant collections of Italian Renaissance and European artwork. He was a founding benefactor of the National Gallery of Art, established the Crest Foundation, and dispersed his magnificent collection across the United States to institutions large and small. Since February of 2017, I've been collecting data on over 4,000 objects housed in over 80 repositories. I sent out a bunch of letters asking everyone to tell me what they had and what was on view, what was in storage, and what needed conservation. And this was all to ascertain the potential for a Crest loan network. As the responses came in, I began to evaluate who might need a conservation assessment. I primarily have a background in registration and know how to do condition reports, but definitely wanted to learn more about conservation before I went on to try to make assessments. So I then went up to New York, and I met everybody from the Crest Foundation. And then I got to meet the ever-impressive Diane Modestini, who is the lead conservator for the Crest Foundation, and her intern, Sean Kwong. And they trained me a little bit on it, and then I observed them doing 2 large surveys before I ventured off on my own. I assessed about 127 objects over the past couple months, going to small repositories across the United States. And as a great result of this project is that we've been able to create a up-to-date conservation list for the Crest Foundation and for Diane. And I've also been able to inform locations that didn't know about the Crest Conservation Program, where you can get your object conserved for free, and the housing repository need only pay for shipment. These are a couple snaps from my journey. In the top left, that is a panel painting that escaped the cradling process in the early stages of the Crest collection. If you happen to have any panel paintings, at one point it was in fashion to keep them as flat as possible, and we've now found that that's not always the best to do for objects that are made out of wood. But anyways, the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see some art restorations under UV. In the center, there are some blanched restorations that were particular to a certain conservator in Crest's history. In the top right, there is an issue with overcleaning. And in the bottom right, it is a panel painting that is probably most interesting to me because it was at a small Jesuit retreat in Maryland, and it hung over a fireplace for several years. So unfortunately, it had severe cleavage and blisters and loss. The Crest Foundation, when they dispersed their collection, it wasn't just to educational municipal museums, but also to small locations like this Jesuit retreat, or a school board in Northampton, Pennsylvania, or a small church in Allentown. And those were the ones that I primarily went out to look at their objects. Now that I have pretty much every response in, I'm able to provide a general percentage of the objects in storage without any conservation needs. And that isn't just stability, but also like aesthetic concerns. And of the objects, there's approximately 49%, that's 1,962 objects that are in storage that could, in theory, be available for loan. Of course, if you're talking about viable candidates for loan, there's several factors that go into that. And you'd have to have a formal loan agreement and all criteria met. But that being said, that's still quite a few objects that are just in storage. So I know that for most museum professionals, we know that there's like 90 to 95% of our collections that reside in storage. And 49% might not seem like that big of a number, but this Crest collection is different in a very specific way. It was Samuel Crest's gift to the nation. It was meant to be seen, it was meant to be studied and enjoyed by the public. If we had something that was similar to like an interlibrary loan program, someone could, or a repository could loan just one object. There's actually a database program that's starting at that's in the works at the National Gallery, that once online could be a great research tool for this. They could also create traveling exhibitions out of objects that primarily reside in storage, or what seems to be the most desired is to create study collections for scholarship and education. If you had a study collection at a university museum, you could create platforms for new classes and overall give students the invaluable experience of working with the physical object. The Crest collection covers like the evolution of the Italian Renaissance, and its variety and breadth just shows how important it is and how important it will remain, and how beneficial a Crest Loan Network could be. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of the panelists. I think we very much want to both keep sight of the big picture ideals, the kind of excitement about getting great works of art out of storage and visible and more accessible, more in play. But I also want to really think a little bit about the nuts and bolts and the behind the scenes. And I think, Amber, your presentation really highlights all of the legwork that goes into building a viable collection sharing endeavor. So thank you for that. I wonder too, Margie, I'm thinking about this notion of matchmaking, because in our experience, the collection sharing projects that have been most successful grow out of a shared passion between 2 or 3 scholars or curators who really care about a topic and somehow find their way to each other through the works, in our case, in the Yale Art Gallery's collection, and then the project grows from there. But you're maybe talking about a bigger kind of system of matchmaking that sounds really exciting.
It is a little bit different than, the usual model that you bring up, which is that curators get together, they have an idea, and they run with it. This is a case where actually, in a lot of cases, the objects are inspiring getting people together instead of vice versa, perhaps, though we know that everybody's being driven by interest in objects. And it happens in a couple of different ways, and I'll just give an example. There's and I'm not going to name institutions because in a couple of cases the ink isn't dry on the contracts, and I didn't ask in advance whether I could reveal projects underway. But there's a smaller institution that has taken the Judy Chicago Carhood painting that is in the Artbridges collection. And it was interesting to them because it's an institution that is regional and since the 1940s has had this fascinating history with women artists and women patrons. And in a conversation with a large institution that has a lot in storage, there happened to, this is where coincidence sometimes is our best friend, mentioning that there was a lot of work by women in their collection that they never get to show. And from that, a collection sharing project, which will be an exhibition that will happen in the end of 2019, where it brings together the knowledge base from both institutions together creating. And in this case as well, it doesn't only have to be two partners. And so a third partner may be brought into the conversation to help construct the framework of the project. And one of the things that's a little bit different about Artbridges as these projects are being created is that there's the interest in having them be flexible enough that as they move from institution to institution, the backbone of the project can remain the same. But if it needs to flex to meet the needs of an institution and its communities, it will have the ability to do that.
Just thinking about all of the steps involved in flexing and meeting the needs of an institution, and I'm thinking about working across museums of different scales, looking at you, Jamal, or Amber, the way that you're trying to work across many, many, many different museums and create a coordinated loan network. You had a very funny example in one of our planning conversations about our work together.
Yeah, and so what we were just talking about is that Yale sent me the contact sheet. And so FISC, we have a small staff, we're 3 people. And so it was interesting when the contact sheet was 3 pages, I started going through it and looking, they wanted the name of the corresponding person, and I could say Jamal, 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 Naku, Jamal, 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 turn the page. And so that can't, at times that can be challenging. And it was funny because we did have a conversation like, oh yeah, you're the only one. There, that's fun. But there's some other challenges too. Working with Margie, there was a, can I talk about that? Yeah, okay, I'll talk about it. I was just thinking about it, but it was something else that was funny too. The Steichen exhibition that was coming. There were these huge murals, and I just knew that we could fit it in the building. I just knew. And Jennifer kept calling me, she's like, Jamal, are you sure it will fit? And she was coming weeks later. Not only would it not fit in the front door, we only had or the front door or the back door or the elevator, we only had about 2 inches of clearance in the lower level of the gallery and probably 6 inches in the upper level, so no, it could not fit. So that was just a funny story about scale.
And there are all sorts of conversations that have to happen among the partners. And Artbridges really sees itself as in a way, serving the institutions who become Artbridges partners. And this is true whether it's a smaller institution or a larger institution. We listen to the needs, and then we try and structure the projects to meet the needs. And in this way, and I have to give a shout out to several of my Crystal Bridges colleagues who are in the audience and have been at this meeting, is that our curatorial team, our exhibitions team, our registration team, they really are also ongoing contributors to projects, because we make a commitment to projects that we will help support where there is a gap in whatever institutions need. And it can happen in different ways. It's not always financial. It's sometimes it has to do with expertise or with staffing. And we do it also, we're starting to work with some contract staff members. So again, we're a very, very young foundation. And particularly we've learned with some of our collection-rich organizations and some of those that are working with Terra Art Bridges, everyone who has started with us in our first 6 to 8 months and even beyond, we're always learning. And so we're very grateful to those organizations who have come with us on the beginning of the journey, because they are helping us work out the kinks. And I would just love to see if, can there be a show of hands? I know that there are a number of Artbridges partners in the audience. Just raise your hands. Great. Well, good. Thank you all.
Amber, you've worked with institutions from the size of the National Gallery of Art to the libraries you were describing. How do you navigate those differences of scale?
Well, I will say I haven't really had any challenges overall, really. Never mind, one really small institution and like one really large institution. I probably had a little bit more difficulty getting in contact and stuff with the larger ones, and then sometimes getting the information I want from them, like conservation needs. Some people didn't really want to give out that information, and I'm also just, this registrar from the Georgia Museum of Art, so I'd have to be like, oh, well, Max Marmer, the president, and like pull some names so that I could actually get some information. But the smaller institutions overall have worked with me really well. So, and I also feel like, I don't know, I was able to, like, being probably an emerging professional and being new, and I'm able to speak with anybody from that small Jesuit church to, although I was slightly nervous at the National Gallery, but being able to speak with all of them pretty naturally. So, and I don't know.
But what a great network to develop as an emerging professional. That's really
Yes,
fantastic.
I agree. It's been wonderful. And it's also really good as an emerging professional just to see the opportunity that is out there for myself, like to go to all of these museums, to meet the registrars at the National Gallery, and to see that it's something that's attainable, if that makes any sense.
And I think that's a great point about these collection sharing opportunities really do allow a lot of new cross-fertilization across the field. One of, I think, the great things that's coming out of Artbridges right now, and it's kind of taking a life on its own, which is, as we've been talking with about 4 institutions about loans that they're taking from the Artbridges collection, it turns out that they have, for different reasons, connections of interest, and just a constellation of things are coming together, and actually Fisk is getting involved in this as well. And so that 4 institutions that are working with Artbridges now are working with the projects that they're doing with Artbridges and starting to work with each other. And they were all, I don't think any of the institutions had ever worked together before. So that's the kind of thing, we see ourselves as kind of a stimulus and a catalyst for lots of different kinds of collection sharing.
I will say that overall, like, everybody seems very excited about the potential for the Crest Loan Network. And I mean, even people that are here in the audience today have talked about ideas and really interested in how we're furthering the process, which over the course of the next year, I'll really start figuring out where it's going or how we're going to get where we're looking to go, basically. But and everybody also has come up with ideas for different traveling exhibitions, or just given me input and just for ways that they really want to be a part of it.
So as the Crest Loan Network continues to sort of evolve and come to fruition and actually become a program, I think even just the process of planning for this panel and the ongoing discussion that will surely follow from it with all of us and hopefully many of you is really informative for developing a new collection sharing program. I think all of our programs are relatively young. I mean, this is kind of a new development, but we're learning. I mean, we have the lessons of our standard loan practices that we all rely on for our exhibitions, long histories of traveling exhibitions and what works and what doesn't work and that sort of thing. The Museum Loan Network is a precedent that we can turn to. But there is a real energy right now around collection sharing endeavors. And I can say that specifically because our program's been fairly visible for a decade now, and I get calls regularly, inquiries about the possibility of starting a new initiative. Yesterday, actually, I got an email while I was here at the conference from a student at the School of Management at Yale with the subject heading collection sharing, and I naturally assumed that he'd come across some reference to this panel and was sending me a note about it. But in fact, he's about to embark on an internship at a major museum, and his task in his internship is to study collection sharing initiatives at museums everywhere, and then put forward some recommendations for that museum to start a collection sharing initiative. So I think one of the things that's come through in our conversations that is well worth continuing is how do our various programs complement each other rather than compete with each other or become redundant. And among our programs, they are quite different. Artbridges focuses on American art. The Crest Loan Network focuses on Crest paintings. Our program focuses on college and university museums in particular. But you start to sort of think that there are lessons that are common and that can inform all of ours. Are there any people, I guess maybe as we open up to the audience, I'd like to start with a question to all of you. Are there any of you who are starting collection sharing endeavors at your institutions? It'd be great to hear what you have going.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Abston at the Mississippi Museum of Art, and so LaTanya Autry is one of my colleagues, so it was great to see her show up there. And we have hired her as the curator of art and civil rights to help develop exhibitions between our institution and Tougaloo College and HBCU that has a pretty deep collection of art. And we're not quite a year into it, but it's been a really positive experience so far, I think. Some hiccups working with another institution that's a university that hasn't really put their practice into place yet as far as caring for a collection. So it's been a lot of learning along the way. So.
Thank you.
MFA Boston, and Margie and I had a chance to catch up earlier, but we're part of the Terra Art Bridges. We're new, it's a pilot, and so we're with Detroit in that endeavor, which is a very different project. We're doing 3 phased projects, 1 object with 4 institutions, 2 in Western New York, 2 in New England. Second phase will be bigger, up to 12 objects from the MFA. And these are the choice of the partner institutions, and they are the Fenimore, the Bunsen Williams Proctor, the Springfield Art Museum in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the Mattatuck in Connecticut. The third phase will be 2 full-on shows of up to 30 objects that will circulate, and we don't yet know what those projects are and what they'll look like, but 2 shows that will go to 2 of the 4 each. I would just say that some snags that we've hit is that, of course, the institutions like to raise revenue. These are not revenue raising at all. They're entirely mission driven. So they're it's bare bones, but I'd love to share with this group that we will be posting soon for 2 separate positions. One will sit in exhibitions in the registrar's office to help with the actual work of sharing these collections with these 4 partners, and the other's going to sit with us in Curatorial, and it will be part Curatorial, part interpretive. So I'd love all those Latinx ladies, I'm going to be calling you soon, because this will be an entry-level type of position where you'll learn a lot. You'll be sitting right in Art of the Americas, but you'll be working with our interpreters as well. And I think someone, Sharon Atkins is here too, I think, and I think someone on this end wanted maybe to talk a little bit about other collection sharing, but just be aware that, you know, you have to very clearly articulate that these are not going to contribute to your revenue-raising exhibition projects, which I know all museums are quite interested in launching.
I think Sharon's right in front of you.
Oh, Sharon.
Well, I think to the nuts and bolts part of the question is just to hear your thoughts, to hear from others, of like how to balance these kinds of mission-driven projects, opportunities, with everything that's happening in your own building, right? And, you know, for us, and, you know, Margie and I have had lots of conversations about this, and Pam as well. You know, we want to share as much as we can through these programs, but how do we balance this sort of external collection sharing with everything that we're trying to accomplish within our own buildings and our, you know, the ambitions of our directors and, you know, different projects?
Well, this is exactly why the third theme that I wanted to focus on is so important to us, this idea of bringing the projects home to our institution and the reciprocity of the partnership, so that we're not just sort of sending things out into the world and sharing staff time, but also really building a project together so that it becomes part of our program. So that's practical because it's a different method for building our exhibitions and thinking about how they're going to really enhance what we're doing overall. It's practical, but it's also, I think, it just feels right, actually. It's a new step in the program that it's a very different thing to send everything out than it is to send work out, but also present it ourselves and own it in that way, and own the collaboration very visibly. And that, I think that's really the next stage of our evolution, and it also addresses the practical side of things a bit.
In terms of thinking about it, I think about it as a great opportunity. And I think about that in terms of our students, because our students in our community are continued to being exposed to new works and new ideas. And so it's given us the opportunity to have new conversations and inspired another generation. And so I think it's important, as you talk about reciprocity, to think about how not only our students engage with the objects that we're receiving, but also how they also engage with the people that are sending them. And so our students have gone to Yale, and our students have worked with your students, with your staff as well. And so that's been a fantastic opportunity. So I think it's important to at least make mention of that.
I think that Artbridges is really aware of the fact that we're taking perhaps some older models and turning them on their heads a little bit, and that there is an experimental part in that as well. And as Elliot said before, this is work that really needs to be mission fit with an institution, and it is, and it also is. The projects around Artbridges are not in any way meant to prevent an institution from also doing revenue-generating projects, but the core of Artbridges is really about sharing art to those who have had challenges of access, so that if that's a mission fit. And I think also something that we've learned with Artbridges is that we're in startup mode. And for anybody who has been involved in any kind of a startup, an initiative, it is labor intensive on the front end. And so when you're trying to do that fast start, there are definite pressures. And we also know along the way that registration and art handling are two of the areas that every institution, large or small, has said, how are you going to help us solve that problem? And we're working on it. But as we're now starting to look forward to projects that are happening in 2020 and beyond, institutions still are figuring out what their program plan for that future time is. And we're finding that hopefully it will be that with the knowledge of Artbridges already on the horizon as people are planning for 2020 and beyond, that it will be able to be fit into larger institutional programs. And also, to Pam's point, thinking about how a project can do double or triple duty. Just one project that actually Crystal Bridges curator Mindy Besaw, who's here, is working on. We at Crystal Bridges happen to have a wonderful collection of 16 works by Martin Johnson Heed that are called the Gems of Brazil. And coincidentally, about the time that Artbridges was being birthed, the Thomas Cole House came to us to say, we're thinking about doing a project, would you ever lend them to us? And we were already thinking of a project, and we said, let's join forces. And we have this new entity that can help support the project on the Thomas Cole House side. And the Thomas Cole House has very small exhibition space, and yet they're across the bridge, across the Hudson from Olana, which also has an exhibition space, and they've partnered before. So in this case, they're acting as one institution, Crystal Bridges being another institution, and we actually have two other partner institutions in the works. And the project will be at all of the institutions, including Crystal Bridges, so it will come home to roost, literally. And so it has benefit to the institution that's creating it as well. So and we also at Artbridges, we think about the need to convene folks to talk about this. And so as projects are bubbling up, we have that opportunity to bring people together. We're also, come June, we're going to have a very active website. If you look at the website right now, I apologize in advance. We just kind of got basics up there to begin with. So you'd have an email address. And so we'll be able to share information. We're even looking at creating digital publications from the projects that are shareable and the like.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. I think, yes, Jamie.
Hello, I'm Jamie Powell. I'm the new Associate Curator of Native Art at the Hood Museum. And I am a citizen of the Osage Nation and come from a background working with the Osage Nation Museum and other tribal museums. And within many of our museums, we don't have the temperature, humidity controls that are often required to take these loans. Is there funding available for institutions to make improvements to their buildings in order to be able to qualify for some of these loan programs?
I'm so glad that you asked that question, because Artbridges, actually, we are starting to talk to tribal museums. And whereas Artbridges right now is not funding infrastructure, we are looking at ways that we can help collections, particularly if they're being shared. Conservation is definitely part of Artbridges' rubric. And then we are also looking at what might be the right next steps to help, since collection sharing is really at the root of Artbridges. Right now, our conversations with tribal museums that, and there are many that have fantastic collections and are willing to be very generous in sharing them, and looking at getting the collections, in some case even some basic cataloging, and bringing scholars together to work on the collections, and think about how we can help support tribal museums work in figuring out how they can create the best conditions for their collections. So it's going to be a long conversation, and it's just very much starting, but we're very much excited to think about how tribal collections can be shared outside of their home communities, and also in conversation with tribal museums around their interest to bring other objects in conversation. And there we also realize that there are objects that run the spectrum between needing, extremely careful humidity and temp and light control to those that are a lot tougher. And so we're in that conversation too about how can we be mindful of the conditions at hand, but then also make opportunities for works that perhaps, can be in different kinds of conditions.
I think there was one more. Yes?
These are wonderful examples that can certainly be used for models for other initiatives elsewhere, but I'm wondering if within your initiatives, and I recognize that they are new, if you have considered cross-border collection, sharing, and exchange.
We're not there yet, but
Right now, Artbridges is starting with the United States. We needed to start somewhere. We actually, one of our Artbridges partners is in a border town, and there's been conversation about that project maybe migrating across the border. And so, again, as a new startup, we are having to keep the project base, at least so we can barely keep our arms wrapped around it, but it'll be interesting to think about that for the future.
The cross collections in very beginning stages.
thanks for the question. And one last question.
Great panel. My question's related to the effects on the canon of what you're doing. Do you see your cumulative efforts refining or expanding the canon in terms of region or race or gender?
Well, in our case, definitely expanding. And I think, I guess I'll cite one of these incoming collections that I referred to earlier. We, last year, received a very large gift of Indonesian puppets that will take us several years, really, to process and prepare for sharing. But the only reason we could accept that very large collection is because we do have this sort of infrastructure now to share with other institutions. And so I think very much about expansion in our case. Others?
In our case, I think very much on the expansion, and we have a couple of different avenues that we can get there as we are building the Artbridges collection, which as we build it, we keep the Crystal Bridges collection in mind because we also have the Crystal Bridges collection available for Artbridges, so there's not going to be duplication. And Crystal Bridges, as well as almost every colleague that I have talked to regarding Artbridges, I don't think I've talked to an institution that isn't interested in expanding the canon. And so we keep that in mind as we add to the Artbridges collection. And we have all these institutions that are our partners who have collections already or interested in creating projects that would expand the canon or just completely, blow the canon out of the water. And so that we're working with Latinx collections, we're working with some different kinds of collections that, may surprise folks that are not usually seen circulating. So we keep that very much in mind. And Artbridges sees itself in many ways as being responsive to others. And so we try and listen and help provide.
So I want to thank the panelists and thank all of you for sharing your endeavors underway and all of your great questions. And thank, of course, AAMC for the wonderful conference over the last couple of days. It's really been great.